Hey Lisa, how you guys doing? Hope you had a great weekend. Quick joke of the day. Hey, what did the Tin Man say after he got ran over by a steamroller? Ah, drats, foiled again. Yeah, kind of cruel. Anyway, all right. So for today, this is beginning the last week of lessons. So we got 3 classes left, really. Um, so for today, we're going to kind of do the 90s. Just do them all. Kind of pull out the two, I think, nuggets. Um, Besides the social stuff, like we already talked about the Rodney King rights today, you're due now. You'll kind of look at kind of some teen angsty stuff. Um, but basically, the two big political takeaways from this decade, um, one is this idea of kind of polarization, which we see coming as part during the Bill Clinton presidency, in which the Republicans kind of run on this kind of national platform. Um, and so you've got Newt Gingrich, which in 1994 kind of nationalizes these congressional elections and basically says we're going to make the president, we're going to make Democrats the topic. And it begins this polarization, and it comes at the same time that you have national conservative radio kind of taking over the airwaves, as well as Fox News kind of becoming something. So all those things kind of converge, and what you get is, Democrats on the defensive. And you can make an argument that they've kind of been on the defensive ever since. And they don't have a rival mouthpiece like Fox News or conservative radio. Um, so that's one of the things coming out here, that Newt Gingrich beginning this polarization by going after Bill Clinton and by going after Democrats. And we still see that today. All right. The other thing is the Lewinsky scandal, which is a horrible name to call this because, again, we're kind of pinning this on the woman when it's really Bill Clinton who is the skeevy guy here. And so it should be called the Bill Clinton scandal, but it isn't, unfortunately. So, again, in this age of Me Too, what you have here is a man in power. He's the president of the United States, beginning a really smarmy affair with a 21-year-old intern and taking advantage of her because he's in a position of power. And so, yeah, we have that. So those are the two major takeaways. Those are the things we'll be talking about in today's video. So I hope all is well. Stay safe, stay smart, and talk to you guys later. Hello. And so today we're going to talk about the 1990s, and in particularly the presidency of Bill Clinton. So just backing up a little bit, after Ronald Reagan's 2 terms, he left office with the highest popularity rating of any president ever. And so in terms of the election of 1992, his vice president, George H.W. Bush, had a huge advantage. And so historians kind of look back and see that George H.W. Bush was kind of elected basically because people thought it was the best way to give Reagan kind of like a third term. And the first 3 years of George Bush's presidency were actually quite successful, and he was quite popular. What happened in his 4th year, though, is that the economy began to tank. He had to raise taxes to kind of cover this, and after he had promised that he was not going to raise taxes. And so we've seen as kind of hypocritical, and he was also seen as being just a little bit out of touch. Now, because he was so popular through so much of his presidency, not many Democrats decided to run against him in 1992. They thought it would be a fool's errand. But Bill Clinton entered the race. And so just as the race was beginning to kind of heat up, Bush's popularity is beginning to go down. And so Bill Clinton was basically able to overcome the power of the ability to take down an incumbent. Again, this very rarely does an incumbent president lose, but Clinton was able to do that through a plurality. There was a third-party candidate to enter the race, so Bill Clinton didn't win with a majority of the popular vote, but in a 3-way race, he did win. Now, Clinton was criticized almost immediately upon entering the White House. And so he was seen as being very friendly with special interests. In particular, he came in with this idea that he was going to overhaul health insurance, and he put his wife in charge of that. And so the fact that a lot of this was done in secret, that kind of scared people that way. Also, he was involved with donors in terms that if you gave enough money to President Clinton, you could as a reward you could spend the night at the White House, which again people were a little like maybe this isn't the best. Um, there were also accusations made against financial dealings that the Clintons had made. One particular was something called Whitewater, which was a parcel of land in Arkansas, where they were from, and the thought was that the Clintons had bought this land that was basically worthless. It was kind of like swampland, and then sold it. Um, and the people that, and the only reason that it was sold was that as a way to give money to the Clintons. This was investigated for years, and there was no wrongdoing ever discovered. In addition, during the campaign and also while he was president, there were accusations of sexual harassment that followed him throughout, and the accusations that he was paying off people to make stories go away, that he was using law enforcement to, again, cover up these allegations. These were stories that were unsubstantiated, but he just didn't seem trustworthy. So you had this kind of going on. Also, early on in his presidency, you had a botched FBI raid in Waco, Texas. And what you had was there was a ranch located just outside of Waco that was run by basically a cult. These people call these Branch Davidians. And the government had learned that they were stockpiling weapons. So the government basically tried to use a search warrant to search the compound. When they went to the compound with that warrant, a gunfight began, and four government agents were killed, as well as like 6 members of this cult. So at that point, the government now is going to go in and basically, search this place, but they don't want to just go in because, now we know they're heavily armed. And so a siege takes place. And so for 51 days, the government surrounds this compound with the attempt of, trying to, starve them out. And after 51 days, the government decides that they're going to attack. And so they use tear gas and flash grenades, and somehow the compound catches fire. And to this day, there's some uncertainty as to whether or not the fire was started by the Branch Davidians or was started by the government. And from this fire, a lot of people are killed. 76 members of the cult are killed, including their leader. But of those killed are also 25 children. And this feeds a narrative of government overreach that we still see today in our country, in which people feel that the government's out to get them, that they need to heavily arm themselves in case the government comes after them. And people use Waco as an example of this. This kind of sentiment, the extreme of this was seen when the federal government building in Oklahoma City was bombed by Timothy McVeigh. It's kind of seen as almost like a retaliatory strike. And so you have this kind of mood that you just can't trust the government, and you can't trust this president. And so all of this led to the midterm elections of 1994. And for the first time, led by this gentleman here, is a congressman from Georgia, Newt Gingrich, who's a Republican. What the Republicans did was they nationalized this campaign, this election. So normally in a midterm election, this is the entire House of Representatives, and this is a third of the Senate, and then there's some governor's races around the country. Normally, all of these elections are local. They're state-based. What Newt Gingrich did was he wrote a book called Contract with America, and the thought was that this is what every Republican in the country is going to run on. So the Republicans had a message, and they hammered at that message, and the Democrats were trying to talk about local, statewide things. And so the Republicans ran on returning family values back to government. They ran on this idea of less government, and they tapped into this idea that you cannot trust the government. And it was very successful for the Republicans. And so in this election, the Republicans gained 53 seats in the House, 8 seats in the Senate, 2011 governorship, the Democratic speaker actually lost his election. And as a reward for taking over the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich then became Speaker of the House. And so what the Republicans then do is they basically now have a counterweight against Bill Clinton. And the way you push back is through the budget. And so what we have is a budget impasse in which the Republicans look to basically slash government spending all across the board. This is when you have all that anti National Endowment for the Arts stuff that you were looking at with your paper. Um, and Bill Clinton doesn't budge. And so now you have a standoff. And so what happens in the summer of 95, I believe, 95, yes, summer of 95, 96, is that you have a government shutdown. And so in a government shutdown, all non essential government employees are told you don't need to work. So parks close, museums close, um, and as a result, a lot of staffers at the White House, the Pentagon, government office buildings are told, sorry, you can't work, you can't come in. And so they're furloughed. And as part of this furlough, what happens is that the White House needs staff members, and so interns are kind of moved around. And so there's an intern from the Pentagon named Monica Lewinsky, who was then moved from the Pentagon to the White House. And while she's at the White House, she begins to have an affair with Bill Clinton. And what is going on here is we have like two different like parallels. So you have this government shutdown and you have this affair going on, but at the same time that you have investigators looking at the Whitewater land deal, and again they're not finding anything there. But the government, Congress, when they allowed for this independent investigation, it was open ended. So while the Whitewater investigation was going on, they were also looking into anything they could possibly find about Bill Clinton. So while that's going on, Monica Lewinsky is having this relationship. She's young, she's 21 years old. She's not from Washington, she doesn't have many friends, and she befriends a woman working at the Pentagon named Linda Tripp. And Linda Tripp is much older than so it's kind of like a mother-daughter type relationship. And Lewinsky, who doesn't have many friends, begins basically confiding in Linda Tripp and tells Linda Tripp that she's having an affair with the president. What Linda Tripp does is she tape records those phone conversations and provides them to Kenneth Starr, who was the guy leading the investigation into Whitewater. And so the Whitewater investigation now shifts towards this Lewinsky affair. And you see it's seen as, and on the slide, it's written as the Lewinsky scandal because unfortunately that's how history knows of it. When this woman, she's 21 years old, why are we sticking her name on this one? It really should be Bill Clinton's scandal. But unfortunately, I don't get to name these things. So anyway, so this now becomes an investigation of, again, a narrative which we've seen before. Bill Clinton is asked about this and he denies it. And once he denies it, and then you have evidence that it did occur, now you have the fact that the president has lied. And so now you have a full-blown investigation. Kenneth Starr actually writes a big, giant report called the Starr Report, which you can read. It's online, detailing specifically the sexual exploits of the President of the United States and this 21-year-old intern. And it's graphic and it is explicit in terms of what they were doing, where they were doing it, when they were doing it. Yeah, you can imagine. Anywho. The president, of course, lies through all this. The president now is lying to an investigation. That's potential grounds for impeachment. And so Clinton is impeached. The House of Representatives, which again is run by Republicans, impeaches him. He is then put up to the Senate for trial. But in the Senate, he is found innocent in the fact that he is not removed from office. And this is kind of how the Clinton presidency kind of ends, and the 90s kind of end. He is reelected, but and he's reelected actually before this scandal kind of takes huge kind of weight in the country. Um, but he is wounded as he leaves the presidency, and as we look into and get towards the election of 2000, which we can talk about next class.